My name is Emily Clark, and for most of my life, I believed in the lie my family had so carefully constructed. A lie that everything was perfect. A lie that love could conquer anything. It was always so easy to believe until it wasn't. We lived in a large old house on the outskirts of town, its walls lined with pictures of us, my father, mother, little brother, and me. Smiles frozen in time, each one a testament to the family I thought I knew. Everything about our house screamed perfection. It was neat, organized, and filled with laughter, at least that's how it appeared to the outside world. But inside, beneath the polished surface, there was a tension I couldn't place. It wasn't until my mother disappeared that I finally understood how fragile the walls we built were. It started as a normal Tuesday. I had returned home from school expecting to find my mother in the kitchen, the scent of her signature chocolate chip cookies filling the air. But when I walked through the door, there was no warmth, no familiar hum of the blender or clinking of dishes. The house was quiet, eerily so. "Mom," I called out, but only silence answered. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe she was at the grocery store, or maybe she was out with friends. But as the evening passed and she didn't come home, worry began to creep in. When my father returned, his expression was unreadable. He said little, but there was something off about the way he spoke, the way his voice trembled. "Your mother's gone," he said simply, as though it were a regular part of our day. "Gone. How, why?" The questions flooded my mind, but my father shut them out with cold, distant eyes. We didn't talk about it for days. His answer was always the same. "She's fine. She just needs some space." But I knew something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones. Days turned into weeks. The empty space where my mother once stood at the center of our home became a constant reminder of something wrong, something I couldn't understand. Every corner I turned felt haunted by her absence. Then it happened. I found the first clue buried in a drawer in her office, something I hadn't seen before. Tucked between old papers was a letter addressed to someone I didn't recognize. The name was unfamiliar, but what struck me most were the words inside. "I can't do this anymore. I've been pretending for too long. The truth will come out and I won't be there to fix it." The words burned into my memory. Who was she writing to? What truth was she talking about? The more I searched, the more questions piled up. The more secrets I uncovered, the more I realized that my family wasn't what it appeared to be. And that was only the beginning. The letter was just the beginning. But even as I clutched it in my hands, the gnawing feeling of dread grew, and the pieces of my family's perfect life began to slip away. It was as though the carefully constructed facade was crumbling one layer at a time. For the next few days, I tried to reach my father, tried to ask him more questions, but each time he would shut me down. His answers became shorter, more clipped, as though he was tired of me pushing him. "Leave it alone, Emily," he would say, his voice tight with a controlled anger I hadn't seen before. "Your mother's fine. She'll be back when she's ready." But what about the letter? What about the dark hints she had left behind? My mother was always open, always warm. She would never hide something from us, especially not me. The days stretched on, and my life began to feel like it was on hold, suspended in a state of unease. I couldn't talk to my father. I couldn't talk to Lucas, my little brother, who had been so confused by everything. He seemed lost in his own world, retreating into his video games and barely speaking to anyone. It wasn't until a week later, when I was cleaning up in the garage, that I found the second clue. Tucked away behind old furniture was a box, one I had never seen before. It was locked. I stood there holding the box in my hand, staring at the rusted lock, knowing deep down that this was it, the key to everything I had been wondering. The key to finding out why my mother left. I found a pair of pliers, pulled the lock off, and opened the box. Inside was a collection of papers, old photographs, and a journal. The journal was small, leather-bound, and worn. The pages inside were filled with scribbled notes, some faded, others legible, but each one filled with a sense of urgency. I flipped to the most recent entry. "The plan is in motion. I can't keep living this lie. They'll know soon enough. I just need to keep the family safe for a little longer." My heart stopped. Who was she writing about, and what did she mean by the plan? I dug deeper into the box, pulling out more papers. There were financial statements with amounts that didn't make sense, names that weren't familiar, and dates linked to trips my father had taken, ones he never told us about. There were also a few names that kept appearing: Michael Steele, Reynolds. The realization hit me with the force of a tidal wave. My father wasn't just hiding something, he was hiding everything. And my mother, the woman I had trusted more than anyone, had been involved in something far darker than I could have ever imagined. I had to confront him. This was no longer about understanding my mother's disappearance. It was about discovering what was really happening under our roof. The decision to confront my father wasn't one I made lightly. I had spent days piecing together fragments of the truth, each discovery more painful than the last. But I couldn't keep living in the dark. I needed to know. That night, I waited for him to come home, my hands trembling as I stared at the evidence laid out before me. The journal, the papers, the truth about my family's darkest secrets. When my father walked in, I could see the weariness in his eyes, the shadows of regret that had begun to show through. The man who had always been my protector, my unwavering foundation, now seemed like a ghost of the person I once knew. "Dad," I began, my voice unsteady but firm. "We need to talk." He froze, the color draining from his face. He must have known what was coming. He'd known all along that his past would catch up with him eventually. I stood up and walked toward him, holding the journal in my hands. "I found this," I said quietly, watching his face closely. His gaze flickered to the journal, and for a brief moment I saw something like fear in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the same stoic expression I had always known. "Claire, please," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "You don't know what you're asking. You have no idea how dangerous this all is." I stepped forward, determined. "I have a right to know what's been going on and why Mom left." The silence hung between us like a heavy curtain. For what felt like an eternity, he didn't speak. Then finally he sighed deeply, rubbing his temples as though the weight of the world was on his shoulders. "Claire," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "there are things you're not ready to understand. Your mother, she wasn't just my wife. She was involved in something far more complicated than you could ever imagine." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each word he spoke unraveling everything I thought I knew about my family. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice cracking. "What is this, Dad? What's really going on?" He looked up at me, his eyes filled with regret, and something else, guilt, perhaps. "The people your mother and I were involved with, they are dangerous, and they will stop at nothing to protect their secrets. I tried to protect you from all of this, but now that you're in the middle of it," I could barely breathe. My world had just tilted on its axis, and everything I thought was real was beginning to dissolve. "Who are these people?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you hide all of this?" He hesitated for a long time, and when he spoke again, his voice was filled with sorrow. "I didn't want you to get caught in it. I didn't want to drag you into the darkness we've been living in, but now it's too late. They know you're asking questions. They won't stop until you're silenced, Claire." I felt a surge of anger and fear, but beneath it was a sense of clarity. I wasn't going to be silenced. Not now, not ever. "I'm not afraid of them," I said, my voice steady, despite the fear that coursed through me. "I need to know everything, Dad. And if you won't tell me, I'll find out on my own." He looked at me, his face twisted with a mix of regret and helplessness. "You don't understand what you're saying," he whispered. "This is bigger than you can imagine. They have eyes everywhere, and if you go too far, if you dig too deep—" "I'm already in this," I interrupted, my voice hardening. "You think I'm going to walk away now?" He closed his eyes as though resigned to the inevitable. "You're right. You're already in it. But you have to promise me one thing, Claire." What I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. "Promise me you'll stay safe. Promise me you won't let them destroy you like they destroyed me." I paused for a moment, unsure of what to say. The promise I was being asked to make felt impossible. How could I promise to walk away from the truth, from my family, from the life I had fought so hard to reclaim? "I can't promise that," I said, my voice filled with quiet resolve, "but I'll make them pay for what they've done." My father's face hardened as I spoke those words, a mix of resignation and fear in his eyes. I could see it clearly now. He had been trying to protect me in his own way, but the truth had never been so clear. Protection had failed, and now I was involved whether I liked it or not. "You don't know what they're capable of," he said quietly, his voice cracking under the weight of what he was about to admit. "These people, they're not just businessmen. They run entire networks, and they'll do anything to keep their secrets buried. Your mother knew that, and she left to protect us." "Then why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice rising. "Why did you leave me in the dark?" "Dad, we could have fought this together." "I thought you were safer without knowing," he said, looking away. "I thought you could live a life free from the mess I dragged you into. But I was wrong, Claire. I was selfish, and now—" His words trailed off as he looked at me, his expression full of guilt and regret. I could see the weight of his decisions pressing down on him, the crushing burden of his past choices. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of our breathing, heavy and thick with unspoken emotions. Then finally, I spoke again. "I'm not walking away. Not now. This is my fight too," I said, my voice steady, though my heart raced with a mix of fear and resolve. "I don't care what it costs, I'll take them down." My father looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and fear. "Then be careful, Claire," he whispered, "because once you step into this world, there's no going back. You'll never be the same." I nodded, determined. There was no going back now. The path I was on was set, and I was ready to face whatever came next. I couldn't sleep. The weight of my father's secrets pressed on me like a heavy blanket, suffocating my every thought. The letter, the cryptic messages, they all pointed to something far darker than I'd ever imagined. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to wait for them to come to me. The first thing I did was search Dad's office. What I found didn't surprise me anymore. Hidden behind old books and files was a folder full of transactions and contacts. The names were unfamiliar, but the dates, they matched the months my father had been acting strange. One name caught my eye: Michael Steele. I had heard that name before, a man involved in shady dealings with my father, someone my mom had warned me to stay away from. But why was he in these documents? Why was my father mixed up with people like that? I didn't have time to dwell on the questions. There was only one thing to do now: find Steele and learn the truth. I called Marcus. "I need you to track down Michael Steele for me." He didn't ask why, he just said, "I'm on it." But as I set the plan into motion, I knew one thing for sure: I was on a dangerous path, and there would be no turning back. The more I dug, the more I realized how deep the rabbit hole went. Marcus came through as always, pulling up Steele's whereabouts. He was staying at a luxury apartment downtown, far from the public eye, hidden in plain sight. I knew if I was going to get answers, I had to confront him. But first, I needed to understand the full picture. My father's involvement in shady deals, the hidden accounts, the ties to dangerous people, it was all connected, and I was the one who had to piece it together. I spent the next few days going through everything: the documents, the old photos, even the memories that had been locked away for years. Slowly, the truth began to emerge, like the pieces of a puzzle that finally fit together. My father had been living a double life. On the surface, he was the charming, successful businessman who had it all. But beneath that veneer was a man entrenched in criminal activities, making deals with dangerous people to keep the family afloat. And then there was my mother. Her disappearance was no accident. She had known too much, and when she started digging, she paid the price. The realization hit me hard: my father wasn't just missing. He had been silenced, and now it was my turn to finish what he started. The closer I got to the truth, the more I realized how little I truly knew. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but I was starting to wonder if I was really prepared for what was about to come. Marcus had set up a meeting with one of his old contacts, a reporter who had been following the money trails tied to my father's business dealings. The information she had could expose the entire operation. I was ready to confront Michael Steele, but I knew that every move we made would put us one step closer to danger. We met in the quiet corner of a downtown cafe, far from the eyes of anyone who might be watching. The reporter, Lena, slid a folder across the table. "These are the records of the transfers Steele's been making for the past 2 years," she said. "It's not just about money. There are names, high-ranking officials, law enforcement people who shouldn't be involved in any of this." I felt a chill run down my spine as I flipped through the pages. The names were more than just business partners. They were key players in a larger game of power manipulation and corruption. "It's worse than I thought," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Lena nodded grimly. "This goes all the way to the top. If you want to take Steele down, you'll have to go through the people he's protecting." I clenched my fists. The deeper I got, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about exposing my father's secrets. This was about taking down an entire network built on betrayal. But I couldn't stop now. I had come too far, and the stakes were higher than ever. There was only one way forward: confront Steele and take down everyone who had been pulling the strings. I spent the next few days in a daze, piecing together the web of corruption that had entangled my father. The walls were closing in, and I could feel the weight of every secret he had buried in the past. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized nothing in this world was simple. Every step I took brought me closer to the center of a storm I had never expected. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The strange looks from the people around me, the sudden disappearances of key witnesses, it was all part of the game now. And then there was Michael Steele. Marcus had managed to trace his movements. Steele had become more than just a businessman. He was now a gatekeeper, controlling access to the higher echelons of power. His apartment, a penthouse with a panoramic view of the city, was where the decisions were made. Decisions that had affected not just my family, but everyone in the city. I had no choice but to confront him. With Lena's help, we set up a plan. The information we had gathered on Steele's connections was enough to expose him, but we needed more. We needed him to confess, to put his involvement on the record. We would catch him in his own lies. I arrived at his apartment that evening, my heart pounding in my chest. Every step felt like a countdown. The door clicked open, and there he stood, his usual calm demeanor replaced by something darker. "You've been asking the right questions," Claire Steele said, his voice smooth, calculated. "But some things are better left unknown." I didn't hesitate. "I know everything, Steele. I know what you've done. And I'm not leaving until you tell me why my father had to die." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth and accusation. Steele stepped back, his eyes flickering with a brief moment of surprise before his face settled into a mask of indifference. "You think you're in control here?" he said with a twisted smile. "You have no idea what you're up against. Your father was just a pawn in a game much bigger than you realize." I took a step closer, unflinching. "Then tell me the game, Steele. Tell me why my father had to die." The room grew colder, the weight of his words sinking in. Steele didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to a small desk in the corner, his fingers brushing over a drawer before he turned back to me, his eyes cold as ice. "Because your father wasn't just involved with us," he said quietly. "He was planning to destroy everything we've built. And in the end, people like us don't let that happen." I felt my stomach tighten. "What are you saying?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Steele's lips curled into a sinister smile. "I'm saying your father made the ultimate mistake. He thought he could take us down, but in the end it was him who was taken down." The room seemed to close in around me. I had known the truth was ugly, but hearing it from Steele's lips made it real. My father wasn't just missing, he had been eliminated because of his attempt to destroy an empire built on lies, greed, and betrayal. I felt the world shift beneath me. The battle was no longer just about uncovering secrets, it was about survival. Steele's words hung in the air, a suffocating truth that threatened to undo everything I had believed about my family, my life. The shock of it hit me hard, but I couldn't afford to let the truth paralyze me. I had to think, and I had to think fast. He had said the wrong thing. The look on his face, the way his smile twisted into something darker, it only confirmed what I feared the most. My father's death wasn't an accident. It wasn't a result of some random, unfortunate event. It was calculated, deliberate, and now I was in the middle of it all. "You're not going to get away with this," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger. Steele's eyes glinted with something akin to amusement. "You think you have the power to stop me, Claire? You think this ends with me?" I stepped closer to him, trying to mask the fear that gripped me. "You've made a grave mistake," I said, feeling the weight of every word. "My father might be gone, but I'm still here, and I'll make sure you pay for what you've done." The air between us thickened as I stood there unwavering, but Steele didn't back down. Instead, he seemed to savor my words as if he enjoyed the power he held over me. "You think I'm afraid of you, Claire?" Steele said, his voice almost mocking. "You're nothing. Just a scared little girl trying to play in a game she doesn't understand." His words stung, but I refused to let them break me. I had a goal, a singular mission now. I would expose him, bring down everything he stood for, and finally uncover the full extent of what my father had been involved in. The truth was no longer a luxury, it was a weapon. But as Steele's smug smile grew wider, something shifted in my gut. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, my voice steady despite the storm swirling inside me. "I will bring you down no matter what it takes." Steele's expression darkened, and for the first time I saw a flicker of genuine fear. But then he smiled again, this time with malice. "You really don't understand, do you?" he asked, stepping back and pulling something from his pocket, a phone or some sort of device. "You've already made the mistake of thinking you're in control. You never were." Before I could respond, his fingers flew across the screen of the device. A moment later, the door burst open and two figures stepped into the room dressed in black suits and radiating danger. They weren't just hired muscle, they were professionals, and they were here to make sure I didn't leave this room alive. I knew the game had changed. The two men who entered the room moved with the precision of professionals. They were not here by accident. They had been sent to take care of me, and the cold, calculating look in their eyes told me that there would be no mercy. The seconds stretched out like hours as I tried to assess the situation. Steele, sensing my hesitation, smirked. "I think it's time for you to learn your place," he said, his voice low and almost amused. "You were never meant to be part of this world, Claire. You should have stayed in the shadows where you belonged." Fear surged through me, but I clamped down on it. There was no room for fear now. My life, my future, was on the line. I had no choice but to act. The first man moved toward me, his hand reaching for my arm with the intent to subdue. But as his fingers grazed my sleeve, I acted without thinking. I twisted away, kicking his leg out from under him, sending him crashing to the ground. For a moment there was silence, an awkward pause in which both the men hesitated, as if surprised by my sudden burst of resistance, but only for a moment. The second man lunged toward me, but I was already thinking 2 steps ahead. I grabbed a chair nearby and swung it toward him, catching him off guard. The force of the blow sent him stumbling back, but he quickly regained his composure. I wasn't strong enough to take both of them on, but I didn't have to be. I just needed time to make them underestimate me to create an opening. Steele watched in amusement, a twisted smile on his face. "You think you can win, Claire? You don't stand a chance." I knew he was right. I couldn't beat them both. But there was one thing I had that they didn't, the element of surprise. I darted toward the door, slamming my shoulder against it, knocking it wide open. The hallway was dimly lit, and I could hear the muffled sounds of footsteps following me. But I didn't stop. My legs moved faster than I thought possible, fueled by adrenaline and pure fear. Behind me, I heard Steele shouting orders. The men were closing in. I burst into the first room. I found a storage closet. Panting, I slammed the door behind me and locked it, my heart pounding in my chest. For a few seconds, everything was silent. The world outside felt distant, as though I had retreated into a separate reality. But the calm didn't last. The door rattled with forceful knocks, and the sound of footsteps grew louder as they neared. I had seconds to act. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out the burner phone Marcus had given me. His number was saved, and I dialed quickly, praying he was still awake. "Claire." His voice came through the phone, anxious. "What's happening? Are you okay?" "They're here. Steele, they're going to kill me. You have to help me." "Listen to me, Claire," he said quickly. "You need to get out of there. I'm sending someone to help you. Stay put. Don't let them get to you." Before I could respond, I heard a loud crash. The men were breaking down the door. "Marcus," I shouted, my voice trembling, "please hurry." "Stay calm," he said, his voice steady despite the urgency. "Help is coming. Just stay quiet. I'll get you out." The phone went silent as I stuffed it back into my pocket. My breath caught in my throat. The door was weakening, and in moments they would be inside. I could feel my pulse racing as I considered my next move. There was no way out, no easy escape. The fight for my life was just beginning. The door buckled under the pressure, and the sound of splintering wood echoed through the small storage room. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to stay as quiet as possible, my heart racing in my chest. I could hear the men outside, their voices muffled by the door, but I knew they wouldn't stop. The more I stayed hidden, the more desperate they would become. I couldn't afford to waste time. I darted toward the back corner, my mind racing with options. There had to be a way out, a way to escape before they got to me. I could hear their footsteps, now slow, deliberate, as if they were savoring the moment. In a split second, a plan formed in my mind. I grabbed a metal rod that was leaning against the wall, a tool left carelessly behind by someone. It was heavy and unwieldy, but I knew it could be the difference between life and death. The door crashed open with a sudden violence, and I heard them step into the room. For a brief moment, I stood motionless, my breath shallow, waiting for the right moment. Then, as the first man stepped forward, I swung the rod with all my strength, catching him off guard. The blow landed with a sickening thud, and he staggered back dazed. The second man lunged at me, but I was already moving my legs, carrying me toward the back exit of the room. There was a small window just big enough for me to fit through if I was quick enough. I reached it just as the second man recovered, his footsteps growing closer. My hands scrambled for the latch, but it was stuck. Panic surged through me. I had seconds before they'd be on me again. With one final yank, the window popped open, and I squeezed through, feeling the cold night air hit my face as I dropped onto the ground outside. I didn't look back. I didn't have time. I ran, my feet pounding against the pavement as I sprinted through the alleys, not daring to stop until I was sure I was out of their reach. As I rounded the corner, I saw Marcus's car parked at the far end of the street. The headlights flicked on as I approached, and the door swung open. "Get in," Marcus said urgently. "We need to go now." I jumped into the car without hesitation, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice shaky. "Somewhere safe," he said, his eyes focused on the road ahead. "We're not out of danger yet." As we sped away from the building, I felt the weight of everything that had just happened crash down on me. The danger wasn't over. Steele and his men would come after me again, but this time I had the upper hand. The truth was out there now, and I was going to make sure it saw the light of day no matter what it took. The car sped through the empty streets, my mind still racing. Every part of me wanted to shut down to ignore the noise inside my head, but I couldn't, not now. "We need to move quickly," Marcus said, his grip tight on the steering wheel. "The moment you went public, you made yourself a target." I nodded, trying to steady my breath. The file we had, now the final piece, was more than just information. It was a weapon. It could take down Steele and everyone involved in this mess. We arrived at a safe house, a nondescript building hidden in plain sight. It was the perfect place to lay low, but I knew it was only temporary. Steele wouldn't stop hunting me until he had everything back under control. Marcus led me inside, and we met with our contacts. The plan was set in motion. We would leak the evidence to the press, but we had to be quick. Any delay, and Steele would crush us. But as we sat there strategizing, I received another text. "You can't run forever." The walls were closing in again. "I have to finish this," I said, my voice steady despite the fear rising within me. "For my father. For everything." Marcus nodded, his face grim. "We're in this together. We do this now or we do nothing." The decision was made. It was time to end the game. The safe house felt suffocating. The plan was set, but the uncertainty hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Every second counted, and every move had to be perfect. I sat across from Marcus, who was still going through the details of our final push. Our plan was simple but dangerous. We would leak the evidence to the press, exposing everything Steele, the corruption, the cover-ups, everything that had been buried for years. But with Steele's empire hanging in the balance, we knew he would come for us. He wouldn't let this slip without a fight. "We don't have much time," Marcus said, breaking my train of thought. "Once this goes public, everything changes. We either win or we lose." I nodded, my heart pounding. The weight of what we were about to do felt unbearable, but it was the only way forward. I couldn't stop now, not when I was this close to the truth. The phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from an unknown number. "You're playing with fire. You won't survive this." My blood ran cold, but I didn't let it show. Steele's threats didn't scare me anymore. I had come too far to back down. I stood up, feeling a new surge of resolve. "This is it, Marcus. We're going through with it. No turning back." He gave me a sharp nod, a quiet understanding in his eyes. We both knew the risks, but we also knew what was at stake. Hours later, we were ready. The files were sent, the media briefed, and the clock was ticking. We couldn't afford a mistake. As I sat in front of the laptop, waiting for the first signs of the storm to break, I felt a strange calm wash over me. This was the moment when everything changed. The moment the evidence hit the press, the world shifted. The storm we had set in motion was immediate, and it was violent. The media exploded with headlines, accusations, and interviews. The truth was out. People from every corner of the city were reacting, some with shock, others with fury. The sheer magnitude of the conspiracy we had uncovered rippled through every level of society. But as the world turned its gaze on Steele, I knew we hadn't seen the worst of it yet. I sat by the phone, waiting. The seconds ticked by like hours, my mind racing with the possible consequences. Had we done enough? Was Steele making his move? The call came an hour later. Claire Marcus's voice was tense, urgent. "You need to get out. They're coming for you." A cold chill ran through my veins. I didn't need to ask who he meant. Steele's men were relentless, and now that the truth was out, they had everything to lose. I grabbed my bag and ran to the car, my thoughts a chaotic mess of plans, fears, and doubts. But I couldn't let anything stop me now. I had no choice but to keep moving, to stay one step ahead. The city was on high alert, but Steele's network was vast, and it wasn't just the hired muscle I had to worry about. It was the people in positions of power who would do whatever it took to silence me. As I drove through the streets, my mind replayed the past few weeks, the decisions I had made, the lives I had touched, and the shadows I had brought to light. I had become a symbol of resistance, and I knew they would stop at nothing to erase me. But as I passed through the empty streets, I realized something: the storm had already broken, and there was no going back. The city was a different place now. The streets that once felt familiar, even safe, now felt like a labyrinth of hidden threats. Every face I passed, every car that lingered too long in my rearview mirror made my skin crawl. Steele was coming for me, and I had no doubt that he would stop at nothing to silence me. The plan we had set in motion was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter, the exposure of everything my father had been a part of and everything that had led to his disappearance. But as the media frenzy continued, I realized the truth had come with a price. People I thought I could trust were starting to question my motives, and the support I had gathered began to fracture. Marcus was the only one who stayed constant, but even his calm exterior couldn't hide the tension in his eyes. "We need to keep moving, Claire," he said, urgency creeping into his voice. "The longer we wait, the more danger we're in." I nodded, feeling the weight of every decision I'd made. This fight wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore, it was about survival. Steele had become a ghost slipping through our fingers, staying one step ahead, and his influence reached farther than we had ever imagined. As I sat in the dimly lit room, the walls closing in around me, I realized that the only way out was to keep pushing forward, to expose everything, to burn it all to the ground. But the cost of truth was something I wasn't prepared for. My father's secrets were just the beginning. The people in charge of the conspiracy were bigger, darker, and more powerful than I had ever anticipated. They were watching my every move, and now more than ever I understood the truth. I was caught in a battle I might not survive, and yet I couldn't stop. I couldn't turn back. The days that followed were a blur. Each hour seemed to drag the weight of the looming danger pressing on me with every step I took. My mind raced with plans and contingencies, each one more desperate than the last. It felt as though every moment I spent in the city brought me closer to Steele's reach and closer to being silenced for good. Marcus had become more and more distant, his conversations short and clipped. I could see the strain on his face, the weight of the decisions we were making pressing on him just as much as it was on me. But we couldn't stop now. We were too far in. It wasn't until the phone call came that I realized just how close I was to losing everything. I was sitting in the small, dimly lit apartment we'd been using as a temporary hideout when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but there was something in my gut that told me it was important. I answered. "Claire," a voice said, deep and cold. I didn't need to ask who it was. "You've done enough damage. It's time to end this." It was Steele. He had finally reached me. "We both know how this ends," he continued. "You can keep fighting, but in the end you're just another casualty. You think you're in control, but you're not." I felt my pulse quicken. "What do you want, Steele?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to remain calm. "I want you to stop," he said simply. "I want you to disappear, and I'll spare your family." The threat hung in the air like a dagger, but there was something about his words that didn't sit right with me. He was confident, too confident. And in that moment, I realized that this was a trap. "You think I'll just walk away?" I said, every word laced with defiance. "You don't get to dictate how this ends." A low chuckle came through the line. "I think you'll do whatever it takes to keep your family safe, Claire. You're just like your father, always thinking you can fix things with one last act of bravery. But it's too late." And then he hung up. I stood there frozen. The threat was real. Steele wasn't playing games anymore. He was closing in. But there was one thing he didn't know: I wasn't going to back down. I couldn't. The phone call had been a warning, but I couldn't allow myself to back down now. Steele had laid his cards on the table, confident that his threats would make me cower. But what he didn't realize was that I had already crossed a line. There was no turning back. I spent the next few hours gathering the last of my things, the evidence we had accumulated, and the files that contained everything I had learned about my father's involvement and Steele's empire. The information was explosive enough to take down anyone involved, but I couldn't just hand it over. I needed to make sure Steele felt the full weight of the destruction he had caused. Marcus had been strangely quiet ever since the call. I knew he was worried. We both were. This was it. The final confrontation. There was no more hiding, no more waiting. Steele had played his hand, and now it was my turn to finish this. I reached out to the few allies I had left. Lena, the journalist who had helped us before, had promised to use her influence to get the story out, but the clock was ticking, and I had to make sure Steele didn't stop us first. We met in the dead of night, the only time I felt safe enough to talk freely. The plan was simple, or so it seemed. I would confront Steele one last time, give him one chance to confess to end it all in the open. But if he refused, if he tried to silence me, I would expose him no matter the consequences. Are you sure about this? Marcus asked, his face a mask of concern. He had always been the calm one, the steadying force between us, but tonight his eyes betrayed his worry. I have no choice, I replied, my voice firm despite the weight of the situation. This isn't just about justice anymore, it's about survival. Marcus nodded, though I could see the reluctance in his eyes. Just be careful, Claire. Once you walk into that meeting, there's no going back. I smiled at him, though it didn't reach my eyes. I've already crossed that line, Marcus. This is the only way to end this. I could see the hesitation on his face as he took a deep breath. All right, I'm with you. The meeting with Steele was set for midnight at an old warehouse on the edge of town. The place reeked of abandonment, the perfect setting for a final showdown. I arrived first, my heartbeat pounding in my chest as I took in the dark, empty space around me. Minutes later, Steele arrived, flanked by 2 of his bodyguards. The tension in the air was palpable, but I stood my ground. The power dynamics had shifted. Now it was my turn to control the situation. You should have stayed away, Claire Steele said, his voice smooth, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. You could have walked away with everything. Instead, you've chosen to be a martyr. I'm not a martyr, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I'm just trying to expose the truth. You're the one who's been living a lie. Steele took a step forward, his cold gaze locking with mine. Truth. You think you know the truth. There are things in this world that are better left untouched. I don't care about your world, Steele, I shot back. I care about my family, and you've destroyed that. His expression flickered for a moment, just long enough for me to see the weakness, but then it was gone, replaced by the same cold mask. I've done what I had to do, he said, his voice turning low, almost regretful. Your father was a casualty. You're just another one in a long line of people who couldn't handle the game. I didn't flinch. You think this is a game, I asked, stepping closer? You've ruined lives. My family is broken because of you. For a split second, his eyes narrowed. I could feel the tension building between us like 2 forces about to collide. But before I could say anything else, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. Steele's eyes flickered to the door. Time's up, he muttered, his hand darting to the gun at his waist. Without thinking, I made my move. The sound of the sirens grew louder, echoing in the empty warehouse like a countdown to the end. Steele's eyes darted around his hand, still resting on the gun at his side, ready to draw at a moment's notice. His bodyguards flanked him, but I could see the uncertainty in their movements. They didn't know whether to protect their boss or protect themselves. I wasn't sure what I expected from this moment. I had imagined this confrontation for weeks, played out every possible scenario in my mind. But standing here with the weight of the truth pressing down on me, all I could think about was how far I was willing to go. Steele wasn't backing down, but neither was I. The gun was out now, pointed straight at me, the cold steel glinting in the dim light. My heart pounded in my chest, but I refused to flinch. This was it, the moment everything changed. Don't do this, Claire Steele said, his voice calm but tinged with desperation. You don't know what you're dealing with. This isn't just about your father. It's bigger than you. I don't care how big it is, I spat back. My father paid the price for this, and I'm going to make sure you do too. Steele chuckled, but it was hollow, a sound full of bitterness. You think exposing me will solve anything? You think you're going to be the hero in this story? There's no hero here, Claire. Just people who get used and discarded when they're no longer useful. I swallowed hard, trying to suppress the rush of anger that surged through me. Then let me be the one who stops it. You're not untouchable, and I'm not afraid of you. Before he could respond, a loud crash echoed from the entrance. I turned just in time to see several law enforcement officers flood into the room, weapons drawn. They were here. Marcus had come through. For a split second, Steele hesitated, and that was all I needed. I lunged forward, knocking the gun out of his hand. The force of the impact sent it skidding across the floor. The bodyguards hesitated, unsure whether to engage or retreat. Steele, now disarmed, lunged at me in a last-ditch attempt to regain control, but the officers quickly tackled him to the ground, restraining him. "You're finished," I said, breathing heavily, my voice steady but full of finality. Steele's eyes burned with fury as he was dragged away. "This isn't the end, Claire," he snarled. "You think you've won? You've only just begun to understand how deep this goes." But his words were hollow now, nothing more than empty threats. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of peace. The truth had been revealed. The people who had controlled so much were finally being held accountable. I watched as Steele was led away, his empire crumbling with every step. But in that moment, I realized something more important. I had done it. I had taken back control of my life, of my family's future. The days following Steele's arrest were a blur of media interviews, legal meetings, and a city that was slowly, painfully coming to terms with the fallout of the truth. The air felt lighter, yet somehow heavier, as if everything had shifted in an instant. But amidst the chaos, I was still haunted by the cost of it all. The truth had been exposed, and justice was being served. Steele and his associates were in custody, their empire crumbling as more information came to light. But no amount of victory could undo the damage done. Mom's health continued to decline. The strain of the past few months, the secrets that had been buried for so long, had taken their toll. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't find peace. Lucas, too, was struggling. He spoke less, his once bright eyes now clouded with confusion and anger. He had been through so much, and while we were free from the immediate threat of danger, the emotional scars remained. I spent my days coordinating with law enforcement, making sure Steele's network would not find a way to rise again. But each night I found myself sitting alone, staring into the darkness, wondering if it was all worth it. The truth had set us free, but it had also ripped open wounds that would take years to heal. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table with my mother, the weight of everything finally broke through. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice fragile. "I never meant for you to be caught up in all this." I shook my head, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. "You don't have to apologize, Mom. We're in this together." She smiled weakly, her frail hand reaching for mine. "I know. But I still wish things had been different. I wish I could have protected you from this." The guilt in her eyes was almost unbearable, but as I looked at her, I realized something important. The road ahead was one we had to walk together. There was no going back, no undoing the damage, but there was healing, slow, painful, but possible. The weeks after Steele's arrest were filled with a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The city, the very foundation of what we thought was a stable world, was beginning to breathe again. The exposure of corruption, the dismantling of the empire, and the revelations that had shaken the city to its core, it was over. But the price of victory had been steep. Mom's health continued to deteriorate, and Lucas, well, he was still a boy trying to make sense of a world that had lost its innocence. I could see the toll everything had taken on him, the fear, the uncertainty, the loss. He hadn't been the same since Mom disappeared, and I wondered if he ever would be. But something inside me had shifted. I couldn't afford to sit idly by and wait for time to heal our wounds. I had spent months fighting to expose the truth. Now it was time to fight for the people I loved. I started making changes, small ones at first. We hired a team of doctors for mom specialists who could help her through the emotional trauma, not just the physical. I made sure she had everything she needed to feel safe and supported, because I realized that the fight didn't end when Steele was behind bars. It ended when my family was whole again. Lucas was harder. He resisted help, preferring to lock himself away in his room, pouring himself into his art. But one night, as I found him staring at a blank canvas, I knew it was time to try again. "Hey," I said softly, walking up behind him. "You want to talk about it?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up his brush and dipped it into the paint, his movements slow but steady. "What's there to talk about?" he said, his voice flat. "The world doesn't care. The world just keeps going, even when everything falls apart." "Yeah, it does," I said, sitting beside him. "But that's why we have to keep going too. Because the world doesn't stop, but we can choose how we move through it." His eyes flickered with something, maybe understanding, maybe just curiosity. But it was enough to make me believe that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for him yet. As the weeks turned into months, life started to settle into a strange rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. The scars would always be there, reminders of what we'd been through, but they no longer defined us. We started to rebuild. The final chapter of our journey wasn't one of grand victories or dramatic showdowns. It was quiet. It was subtle. But in its own way, it was the most important. Months had passed since the storm of truth had torn through our lives. Steele was behind bars, his empire crumbled, and the city had begun to rebuild itself piece by piece. But the most significant change had been in us, in me, in Mom, and in Lucas. We were no longer the family we had been before the storm. We had been forged in fire tempered by pain, but now we were stronger. I stood by the window watching the city below. The streets were filled with people living their lives, unaware of the chaos that had once consumed them. Life had returned to normal, and yet nothing felt quite the same. Mom was getting better. Slowly, cautiously, she was learning to live again, to trust again. The therapy helped, and the support of family and friends had made a difference. She was not the woman she had been before, but maybe that was a good thing. She had fought her demons, and was finally starting to find peace. Lucas had found solace in his art. His paintings, once dark and confused, were now full of life and color. They told stories of pain and healing, of a boy who had lost everything but found a way to express it. We didn't talk much about what had happened, but I could see it in his work, his way of processing, of moving forward. And as for me, I had found a new sense of purpose. The fight to uncover the truth had changed me. I wasn't the same person who had been too scared to ask questions. I had learned the cost of secrets and the price of silence, but I had also learned the value of truth and the strength that came from standing up for it. I looked at the family photo on the wall, the one from before everything fell apart. It was an image of us all smiling, unaware of the storm that would soon tear through our lives. I had once thought that photo represented perfection, but now I understood that true strength wasn't in perfection. It was in the ability to rebuild, to rise from the ashes. And that's exactly what we had done. We were still fractured, still scarred, but we were whole. Together, we had fought the darkness and found the light again. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The storm had passed and a new dawn had come,